name is George Stoney. I come from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I teach at New York University and make films when I can.
What would go into a good documentary portrait of you?
I don't know that it's worth your time unless you are using that portrait to say something else. If you have something in mind that you think needs to be said or needs to be conveyed, and you can use me to say it, then it's up to you. But just doing a portrait, I don't think is worth the time. A New York thing. It's not in front of my door.
Wake up, everybody! Everyone turn around and look at us!
Tell us where we are, George.
Well, this is Washington Square, about 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. It's about 55 degrees, very comfortable. And lots of people are out, particularly the dog people, as you see on your right. You see, in New York, if you have a dog and the dog smells your dog, then it's all right to talk. Otherwise, it's you're suspicious.
Come on, Fishy, this way.
So we've got a few hundred bulbs here so that everyone can do some planting. And right now we're planting over here and on that side, and there's a couple other sections we're going to do. So we're going to split up into a couple different groups.
Obviously, Washington Square is a place that is very dear to me because I pass it every day that I walk to school. I cut through it, observe life there.
Every city neighborhood needs open spaces, just so people can rest or stroll about and see a bit of green. When well placed, these are usually well used. Washington Square on a busy day reminds you that even open spaces could use some open spaces.
I have many associations there, particularly from the 60s when it was a great rallying point, and I made videos there. And then in the 70s when we started public access, that was a locus for a lot of our early work. But now, when I cut through there, almost every bench, every section has some memory. And so it's a live place in a way that no other place is.
Everybody!
You know, I desperately have been trying to think, what in the world could I say to come close to the heart of this man? And then it came to me like a revelation. Edward Kennedy Ellington used his orchestra as his instrument, and that he wrote for each individual musician, so that there was a dialogue that developed. He did this with everyone in his own way, so that all of you here today, perhaps some of you sidemen and some of you stars, you are his orchestra. And so you love this man because he touched you in his own way. And I think that's certainly part of the secret of his life. Touching each person in his own way and according to the person that he or she is.
because of the way you've worked as a teacher with many different individual students, I sometimes see you as a kind of shepherd of the media flock. I don't know if this is a fair metaphor or not.
There is a parallel with John Gensel. It's quite true that I saw people reading into him what they needed, and I find students doing that fairly often. Last fall, in the session of documentary tradition devoted to propaganda, I showed a half-hour film about organ donation. A remarkable film. It was 3 parts, 3 10-minute commercials.
I was driving along yesterday and I saw some children playing in the playground, and it made me think about the fact that one of the first lessons we teach our children is to share. And I think that's very valuable when you look at organ donation. It's because that's the ultimate sharing your life, sharing your person with someone else. Propaganda, spreading the faith, and with the hope that some results will come. I had a daughter who died at 42, and somebody now has her heart, somebody else has her eyes, somebody has her kidneys. I can't tell you what that means. Well, we have the organ donation pamphlets here. Judy, you want to explain how they handle this? And of course, the immediate response is, that's not propaganda. But I passed out organ donation cards, told them about Cashel, and I got most of the class to sign up. I said, that's the way media ought to be used. Combination of testimonial, personal intervention, and viewing.
What makes a good film good?
Well, for the most part, I've made films that have a social message. So I've believed in audience tests, done it for a long, long time. And if, after the film is shown, I find that people are stimulated to think about the subject matter, I say, that's a good film. I feel that it's my job as a filmmaker to have enough respect for the audience to give them something that has a view of society that will strengthen what they do, and maybe tell them something that they didn't know at the same time. I think the best example is All My Babies.
I want you to meet Mrs. Mary Cooley, a midwife who lives in Albany, Georgia. This is a story of how she helps people like Ida Fleming, who engaged Miss Mary to deliver her 3rd child. People like Adam and Maribel Dudley, newcomers to Dougherty County, who bring their troubles to this midwife. In the county health department are doctors and nurses who help Miss Mary do the job to which she and thousands of other midwives all over the South have dedicated their lives, the birthing of healthy babies.
I'm gonna hold you close to my heart now, ain't that good news?
Yeah, a little smile.
Yes. Beautiful blue eyes.
All right. So maybe we go from the title sequence to the Freedom Singers to maybe a little bit about you.
Okay.
We share similar backgrounds, both being PKs, pastors' kids. Not that the ministers have anything to do with our ethics, but I think more our interest in community fuels our interest in ethics. And I think George trusts my heart. And I very much trust his.
I met George Stoney in 1996, I believe. I was in the 9th year of my incarceration. I was doing 15 years to life under the Rockefeller drug laws, and he had a camera, and he was wise and would always ask us questions that never offended us. I remember getting on the stage for the first time, and I was like, oh God, I closed my eyes. I said, well, here it goes. And I came out and I got into character, and I said, gentlemen, and everything was quiet. It was like the most quiet, and I said, I got them. And that's when I said, you know, like, I went on from there, and I knew they were listening. So I just looked at the lights, and I just didn't see anybody, and I recited my poem. I begin to say with soothing manners,
Gentlemen, I begin to say with soothing manners not used today, I offer you the good life.
I'm in that film because that was my form of fighting not to become what society said I was. It made me have a purpose. I have a purpose. And my purpose was to tell a story, and hopefully, you know, that people not only see me as an artist, but also that people will see that there's something wrong with the system. That's an area in our society that we need to fix dearly, you know, but everyone is afraid to touch it for fear of being demonized, but not George. It was bold to do what he did. It's bold to care. He's bold. You know, I don't even know if I look at him as a filmmaker more than I do now as my friend.
So if this dream is your goal, you pay with your soul.
And when I finished the poem and I turned around and I heard the cheer, I broke into tears. And I will never forget that feeling. It was probably a spurt of growth in that moment. I grew 30 feet high. And I would always, October 8th, 1997, I will always remember that day and forever that day. It was a rebirth.
One always hopes that a film will bring about change. I'm less skeptical than many filmmakers about that, because I've seen films bring about change, not on a massive scale, but on individuals. And change generally is made by individuals. I think that also, in my experience, many people who have helped me make films have also been changed by it. A good example is a film I made with hillbillies called The Newcomers, about people who are moving out of the Appalachians and into Cincinnati.
The migration of unemployed workers into the cities is going on all over the world. These could just as well be Japanese farmers looking for work in Tokyo, a Canadian miner in Toronto, sugarcane cutters from Puerto Rico searching for employment in New York. Since the Second World War, millions of North Americans have left their homes on farms or small towns to find jobs, and more are arriving every day.
That film required that I get to know people intimately enough to get them to be themselves in front of the camera. And in the process, many of my prejudices against hillbillies were challenged. So I was changed by the experience. And their relationship with me changed their attitude towards people from New York and educated people and people whom they would always thought were going to look down on them, so they were always on their guard. Well, that's on an individual basis. Whether or not those films had that effect on the average viewer, I don't know. The successful experiences of a documentary filmmaker always rest on two things. One is luck, and the other is the respect he or she pays to the people in front of the camera.
I still don't know what phone number I will have in Brazil.
The picture is really from here, looking at all of you people.
Yeah, really, it is. Oh, that's great.
That's lovely. Yes,
Thank
good.
you.
See, I think every film has a point of view. Just you're recording this, you're not seeing the rest of the room. You're not recording the fact that Betty may come in soon. You're not recording all the kinds of things that are happening around. If you panned around this room, you'd see a lot of strange objects. The observational filmmaker would say that these objects on their own are illustrating my interest in life. But I say that only when you know the background, where they came from, how they were associated with me, etc., would you be able to understand more than just the simple view of them. This object here was made by Betty's daughter, Jennifer. It's been here since she and her two daughters spent almost a year with me in this small apartment. It was one of the happiest years of my life. When she and her, I think the kids were 5 and 7. And it was just like living with people on a small ship. This is Robert Osborne's, the well-known cartoonist's work of Chaplin's. I'm doing this to illustrate how one method of getting the variety in somebody's life, such by having them say, where did you get this object? And having those objects, in effect, talk, because each of these objects has a story. Most of us were not built for the box. The professionals do this. The professionals spend a lot of money with plastic surgery and makeup and so forth to look good on the box. And so our judgment tends to be how we look against the professionals on the box, unless you're very careful in your storytelling to introduce them differently. It's interesting how certain peculiar things help one to accept one's image.
Don't give up the mic.
I used to be very uncomfortable seeing myself on video. And then I started noticing that some of my expressions and characteristic movements reminded me of my daughter Cashel. And it's all right. There's Cashel. It's fascinating to see how that has helped. me except myself.
Like Jim Truax over in Solar, we got 25.
Somebody some time ago dubbed me the father of public access, which is absolutely ridiculous. There was a whole group of people here, and I was just one of them, one of the people in the crowd. But my glib answer to that is, since paternity is easy to ascribe and difficult to disprove, even with DNA, and I'm proud of the office, I will claim it. But we had dreams of what public access could do, and of course I'm disappointed. You always are. But going around the country, I see enough places where it's having its intended use and effect in at enough times so that I haven't lost heart. This morning I turned in that program about Indian rights, great. I see a program about black reparations, not something that I particularly agreed with, but the blacks are having their voice. I see the Latin band that was on this morning. None of that would be available on television without public access. So there it is. These tapes have been put in order in those boxes. Well, unfortunately, my raising is catching up on me because I was raised to reverence books. So I can't stand to throw a book away. And now that my eyes are getting bad, I am like an alcoholic having to avoid bookstores the way an alcoholic has to avoid saloons. Oh. And I just know I shouldn't buy books. What in the hell is all this? Sic Transit Gloria. Oh, this is something I think you've seen before.
Sure. Captain Stoney.
Yes. What I did very often was to take a lot of stills and put them up and take them back to people. I found it a very good way to get they explained a second visit, and then if we hadn't gotten the material we needed, people were much more willing to speak because I'd just brought the snapshots back. Someday I'll have to go through and identify all this stuff. Someday.
Right here to the end. You're the last one on the shelf right now.
Where will my urn go?
We have a separate section for items separated. Other formats.
Yeah.
Some good stuff in there, Joe.
Nicely exposed.
Yeah, a couple ones before was incredible.
This is mine. That wonderful one with the law enforcement guy and the hole in the back of the jail. And this is, I remember that. I started doing photography because one of my jobs was to show the farm security photographers around. And Jack Delano finally got fed up because I didn't see what he saw. And so he helped me buy a rolly cord, and I started taking pictures. But I was working under such wonderful photographers that I never thought about myself as a photographer. My contact with film was limited to Pere Lorentz's The River. That was a piece of propaganda that we had, and I found that it was extremely useful as a way of warming up the crowd before I made my pitch for farm security. And so I had a portable projector, and I showed it, I think, 118 times. And it never failed to hit its audience. And I've often wondered why. And then I realized that it has the form of an evangelical sermon. You know, it begins with the beautiful nature. This is the way Eden, this is Eden. And then man comes along and he does all these evil things to it, and we get into trouble. But then we repent and we begin to know what to do about it, and salvation comes with the TVA and the big dams. And so that's the way the film ends. And it's a wonderful emotional shape. And I showed that over and over again. But I never, not a single time did I ever think I'd like to make movies. I got into film quite accidentally. I went into the Army from farm security, and the idea was that your employer would give you your job back when you got out of the Army. By the time I got back, farm security had just about disappeared. And then I needed a job. And Nick Reed, a fellow from Chapel Hill, he somehow got involved with filmmaking. And he needed somebody who could write scripts for farmers. And he thought my connections with farm security might help.
The nearest doctor is often 30 miles away. The nearest hospital, 100.
So, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Okay. There we go. Our titles.
Lulu, what do you remember of this film?
I remember doing it. We went to Quebec City.
Yeah.
And we were in Quebec City, and I think you decided that we should make a film. And I think it was in the early days when we had just gotten Super 8. And we just had those little portable cameras. And we started just passing it back and forth and filming each other. You know, I think this was right about the time the Beatles did those crazy movies too.
Oh, yes.
So I think that was probably part of the
Yes,
inspiration.
probably.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's not one for the ages, I would say.
No. It's a period piece for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very funny. Watching you and listening to you talk about making a film, and how when you make a film you try to have the person who watches the film find their own truth.
Mm-hmm.
Hear voices from different people, so that you're not didactic. You're not saying this is right, this is wrong in the film with a real strong perspective. You're basically allowing other people to speak, and let the watcher, the viewer, hear the truth and figure out the truth. It's like an ability to see something and see the complexity of things, and to sort of figure out how to get there in a way that you figure out a sense of ethics rather than some sense of righteous truth. I don't know if any of that makes any sense.
No, it's an interesting way of putting it.
Oh, there you are.
Get it out, Mars! Get away! Go away! Get it out, Mars!
Come on now, let's come out and talk.
No.
Let's be friends. We want to help you.
No, I'm afraid to come out.
We're not going to let your neighbors bother you.
Those son of a bitches, I'll cut them up. They cut me up, I'll cut them up before.
Watching you sort of show things in their complexity and all the different sides helped a lot. In fact, the police films, when we watched the police films, it was a perfect example of. You know, when Sylvia Betts said, you know, take your dirty work somewhere else because you make the cops look so good, I hate cops. You know, that's it, you know? It's like, you know, everybody's got, there's complexity to everything.
Yeah.
And there's nobody who's necessarily all bad.
Yeah.
You know, and there's nobody who's necessarily all good.
We don't want to be a Canadian citizen. We don't want to be American citizens. They told us a long time ago that we were North American Indians. And today we feel this way too. We feel this way because we think that this reservation is ours. And it does not belong to the white man. It's the only part we still have left.
The people of Akwesasne, which the white man calls the St. Regis Reservation, have lived on this land.
George Stoney was our producer at the Challenge for Change, and I told him what was going on over here. And when I talked to Mr. Stoney, I didn't realize that, you know, I thought this is the system, you know, this is the government. They're naturally going to say no, but he took a genuine interest. George was very instrumental in recognizing that we're sitting a moment in history here where film work became an integral part of communication and a challenge to the system, and giving a voice to a people that didn't have a voice, and giving them an opportunity to state their case and make a connection to the outside world. We wanted to start with history, we wanted to deal with contemporary issues, and we dove into it. And so when we took over islands on the St. Lawrence, he would move about. He would be able to go into certain meetings that a white man could not go into. And because he was quiet and listened well, they didn't find him to be a disturbing person. I believe that a filmmaker's got to be many things, not just a technician. It's not all related to film work. You have to have a character. You have to have the ability to communicate. You have to have the ability to understand issues. And how do you react to them? If you're a man of integrity, if you're a man of decision making, as he was, and he said, we should try to do this. One time he said, what we've shot this week, we're going to go to Ottawa in the heart of the bureaucracy of Indian Affairs, and we'll show them what we shot. Those things didn't happen back then. And then he got their reaction. And then he went to the people who were living on the island. They were the residents there, the non-natives, and he said, let's get their side of it too. So he went and filmed them. And so we begin to realize how far apart we are in terms of understanding what the issue was about. And so between the non-natives and us, we started to communicate a little bit more, or at least understand each other, our position, why we're doing certain things. Totally unheard of but back in those days. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, we started sitting together and wondering how we're going to be able to resolve these issues, and we found out that the person that you have a grief against, whose land that they think you're occupying and we think they're occupying our land, we're not the enemies. The government was the real enemy. Mm-hmm. He's always bucking the system to some degree. His attitude was, there's some way to get it done, let's find it. And if an idea had to be advanced, let's find some way to put it on a table and get on with it.
I find it interesting that my father hasn't delved into these evil little devices.
The earliest I remember working with my dad, I think it was 6, and I was the kid in one of his films. And I think it was a film about heart attacks.
How long is Southern Voices?
It's not really a business, it's a life. He bleeds media. He has had an opportunity literally to change the way that people think and people communicate. He's able to get people to look at his way and he will look at their way. Compromise without really selling yourself out. Okay? I mean, that's the thing. You've got to be able to get along with people. And even if you know that at the end of it you're never going to talk to each other again. But it's just also being able to just come to a middle ground. And sometimes it's difficult. There's people who are known for not giving an inch. You know, he'll do what he wants to do, he'll get what he needs to, but he will also give them what they need.
On Sunday, outside of church, about the only entertainment we had was to take pictures, maybe go up to the cemetery or out in the mill yard and take pictures with a Kodak. That's a black lady, Aunt Eliza. She washed for my grandmother when my grandmother's children were small. And then when my mother grew up, she would come over and wash for us.
In the early 30s, there weren't any black women in the mill at that time. They did not hire black women in the mill. And we worked for the people that worked in the mill, the mill villages. And we took care of their house, took care of the children, and did their work while they worked in the mill. That was our occupation at that time.
They didn't have to pay them very much.
They just practically raised the children.
You could take your black hands and you could stir it in their dough or in their foods, and you could take your black body and lay in the bed with the child and protecting it, but you couldn't come in their front door, right? You weren't worthy to come in their front door.
We had black domestic help, poor as we were. Of course, the blacks being on the bottom of the social ladder at that time, there was no place they could work except, they couldn't work in the mill, by the way. They couldn't come past a bale breaker, I don't believe.
I went to work when I was 13 years old at the Modena Cotton Mill. That was around about 1926, somewhere along in there, I think, about that time. I worked in the warehouse. We never did get to run no machine, though. No way, we didn't get to run no machine.
Were there any black spinners or weavers or loom fixers back then?
No. I did not went not in the mill where I worked.
Did you ever wonder why there wasn't?
I don't know. Do you know? I don't know. Wonder why.
Yeah.
Do you wonder why?
I have a pretty good idea.
Well, why?
They wanted to save the jobs for the white man.
All right. That's what I think. I just letting you say it first. Yeah.
Yes, I'm afraid that was what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good morning, gentlemen.
So what kind of a director is George?
I think he's always thinking in concepts when he directs people. And George loves to get, he gets deflected with his own footnotes. He's so interested in something that he wants all the little bits and pieces. So things will drift off subject, which is no problem on tape, but on film used to be very difficult. You had 10 minutes on the camera and it was expensive, and we'd get to 5 and then George would go off in a parabola. He likes little footnotes and detours. But what sort of director? Well, his films speak for themselves. And all his films have real content, social meaning. You just have to run with George. Disappears like the white rabbit, and away he goes.
What did you want to be when you grew up, George?
I wanted to be a novelist, of course.
You did?
Those in the 20s and 30s, that's what one wanted to be. And I was reading Thomas Wolfe, and I mean, that's heady enough.
Yeah.
Not Tom Wolfe, but Thomas Wolfe.
Right.
Well, and so I wanted to be the next Thomas Wolfe.
And did you, what your family, tell me what your family did, your parents.
Well, my mother died when I was 5, and my father was a failed preacher. The fact that my father was an agnostic, started out to be a very deeply religious person, but he was also a scholar. He he went to theology school, learned Latin and Greek, and became very suspicious of the scriptures. And by the time I came along, he was reading us the Bible over the breakfast table and at dinner table particularly. And we had to sit there and listen to his explanation of why this scripture might have meant this thing and the other thing and so forth. And by the time I was 10, he was a true agnostic. But he missed the poetry of the services. He missed the good music that he used to have in the Church of Ireland. And he wanted me to have it. So he registered me in the Episcopal choir. But lest I be brainwashed, he took me around the old chancel, showed me the rose windows and showed me the pictures of the saints and showed all this kind of thing. And he says, "Son, I want you to remember this is all idolatry." Well, a year later, when I was chosen to carry the cross in front of the choir, I was so proud of myself because I was the only person in the building who knew it was all idolatry. Now that came back to me recently when I was chosen to carry the torch in front of NYU's graduation. And I thought, my father had prepared me for this role, but I won't be the only person in the assembly who knows it's all idolatry.
One of the things we should ask every day to ourselves is, why am I here?
The most important thing I think I've learned from Prairie is that what the student brings to the classroom is the most important thing in that classroom. Not what the professor brings in, not what the textbook has, but what the student brings in. A teacher should help the student use the knowledge that they both share to do something useful for his life.
The final chance to get out of here, and then grad school and so on.
The cliffs and skies and faces one sees on the Aran Islands these days haven't changed very much since Robert Flaherty came here back in 1931 to make his world-renowned motion picture, Man of Erin. Flaherty, America's most famous documentary filmmaker, had been attracted to these tiny islands off Ireland's west coast by stories he'd been told about the hard life of the people. People whose very faces had been chiseled by the storms that lashed their rocky shores. Today, the film Robert Flaherty made here has itself become legend, a glorious celebration of man's heroic struggle against the forces of nature. The film is also a legend the children and grandchildren of Flaherty's one-time film stars have lived with for more than 4 decades. Our film will try to find out why this great artist worked as he did, and to weigh the consequences when life becomes myth.
What effect on the viewer do you hope how the myth was made will have?
I hope that they will
be interested in the humanity that's behind any documentary. I hope that they will introduce them to the idea of documentary before verite came along to confuse us with the idea that you're getting absolute truth if you just record things without interference, and to honor Flaherty himself. As I say in the film, I think that it's a beautiful job, and it was an amplification of his dream about what he was trying to say.
I'm over at George's, okay? Take care.
I'd always wanted to make a film about Lachaise because it was a very romantic story. In the first place, his love, his wife, his great love and his passion was Betty's great aunt, my great love. And he fell in love with her for pretty much the same reason that I fell in love with Betty. It's a combination of beauty and sexual satisfaction and all kinds of, all of those good things that are combined in the word love.
A lovely pink. That was a great pink. Thank you.
Aimé, I think you will be pleased with it. I myself am drunk with happiness, drunk on you, drunk on translating you. Ivre de toi, ivre de te traduire, vers toi, tout à toi. In me is the fervor of adoration of you, of your mind, of your beauty. Mon aimé, tout en moi.
Tell me, if you would, George, how you want to be remembered.
Well, I would like to be remembered as a happy collaborator if I'm being remembered for my film work. If it's my journalistic work, I would like to be remembered as a product of the University of North Carolina, which I think stands for the kind of better world that we were all fighting for in the 30s when I went to the University of North Carolina. So you can lie here and just make your own music. Enough is enough. That's the title of this segment, which means that I think when you get to be 90 and above, you have the right to say, I've had enough, and end your life. Now, there are all kinds of legal, medical, and religious opposition to that idea, but I think that it's the next civil rights movement. People don't realize that how long it took to educate the public to accept what happened in the civil rights movement. We look back now and we think, oh, when Martin Luther King march from Selma to Montgomery, that did it. But as a white Southerner who was born and raised there and worked there for many, many years, I know that the civil rights movement was accepted only after a great deal of public education. And that's what we need now, to accept the idea that at the age of, say, 85 or 90, you have a right to end your life if you want to. My own feeling is that a great many of us are living far too long. And there's a whole establishment to keep us going. And I'm not sure that that's really worthwhile.
What do you try to get a film to do?
Well, I hope the films I make will cause people to look at the screen less and get involved in real life more.
We're at the birthday party of George Stoney and Betty. It's Betty's 90th birthday and George's 91st.
Yes. When I was 23, I met George and great Betty. She was always there for me. Thanks to my brother Stanley and George upon a whim went ahead and did a film about kids that we had trained. So our best friends they remain. Everybody, happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday to ya. Happy birthday to you. Thanks, George. I'm awful lucky, dear.
Yeah. We are awful lucky. We are awful lucky.